My name is Catalina, and at 35 years old, I never thought I'd hear my own mother tell me that I didn't live in my home anymore. Those words shattered something inside me that I don't think will ever fully heal. It started like any other day. I was halfway through a long nursing shift at Memorial Hospital when my phone buzzed. It was my 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Her small, trembling voice whispered through the line, "Mom, my key doesn't work." I froze. She'd been trying to get into my parents' house, the place where we'd lived for the past 2 years after school, but her key wouldn't turn in the lock. It was raining, hard, and she said she'd been waiting outside for hours. My stomach twisted as I signed out early and rushed to my car, praying it was some mistake. The rain hammered against the windshield like it was punishing me for something I didn't yet understand. I had no idea that drive home would change everything I believed about family. To understand how it got to that point, I have to go back. I've been a nurse for 12 years, mostly in the pediatric ward. It's not an easy job, but I love it. There's something deeply fulfilling about caring for children, the honesty in their eyes, the way they fight even when they're scared. Lily has always been my reason for everything. Her father, Marcus, left when she was 3. He said he wasn't built for domestic life. Music was his real passion, he told me, as if that justified disappearing from his daughter's life. The divorce was fast, brutal, and final. After a few inconsistent child support payments, the money stopped altogether. For years, it was just Lily and me in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. We didn't have much, but we had peace. Every morning before school, she'd draw tiny doodles on the fridge for me to find after my shifts, little hearts, smiley faces, sometimes just the words, "You can do it, Mom." That apartment was our sanctuary, until it wasn't. Rent went up, my car broke down. Then came medical bills from a minor accident that left me with a sprained shoulder and weeks of reduced hours. I tried to stay afloat, but the numbers never worked. That's when my mother, Eleanor, called with what seemed like a lifeline. "Move back home," she said, her voice unusually warm. "Your father could use the company, and you could save money. Families should stick together in hard times." My father, Robert, had been diagnosed with early Alzheimer's. The thought of helping him while regaining stability sounded almost noble. We moved in a month later. At first, it was fine, almost good. My father was delighted to have Lily around. He'd sit with her by the kitchen window and name every bird that landed on the feeder. She'd giggle, correcting him when he got one wrong, and he'd wink, pretending it was a test. But the peace didn't last. My mother had always been controlling, meticulous, rigid, but something in her had hardened with time. Living under her roof as an adult was different. Every choice I made became a quiet battle. If Lily stayed up late reading, my mother would frown. Children need strict bedtime routines. If I bought my daughter a small treat after a tough week, she'd purse her lips. "You're spoiling her, Catalina. She'll grow up ungrateful." It wasn't advice, it was judgment dressed up as concern. Then there were my siblings. My brother Thomas, an accountant, and my sister Valerie, a high school teacher. Both lived nearby. They were frequent visitors, always ready to echo my mother's criticisms. "Mom just wants what's best for you," Valerie would say sweetly. "Maybe you rely on her a bit too much," Thomas would add with that superior calm that made me want to scream. I told myself to endure it. It was temporary. I was saving money, paying rent, helping care for Dad. It wasn't charity. But over time, their tone shifted from judgment to hostility. My mother began speaking to me as if I were still a child, disobedient, ungrateful. And though I tried to shield Lily from the tension, she noticed. "Mom," she whispered one night as I tucked her in, "does Grandma wish we didn't live here?" I smiled, brushing her hair back. "No, sweetheart. Grandma just has her own way of showing love." It was a lie. 3 weeks before everything fell apart, we had what I now know was a setup. My mother hosted one of her Sunday dinners: roast chicken, green beans, and barely concealed contempt. Thomas kept talking about self-sufficiency and how his coworker had finally moved out of his parents' place after a divorce. Valerie chimed in with a story about one of her students whose single mom had just bought her first home. Independence is so important, my mother said meaningfully, looking straight at me. I smiled tightly, pretending I didn't understand the implication. That night, as I helped Dad to bed, he gripped my hand. "Don't let her talk to you like that," he murmured, his voice soft but clear. "You've done nothing wrong." I kissed his forehead, blinking back tears. But within weeks, everything collapsed. It was a Thursday. I had picked up an extra hospital shift to cover a coworker, meaning I'd be home around 7 p.m. "Remember, go straight to Grandma's after school," I told Lily as I dropped her off that morning. "Lasagna's in the fridge, your favorite." She smiled. "Got it, Mom." At 3:15, I expected her usual text, "Home safe." At 4 there was nothing. At 4:30, I called. No answer. When I finally reached her, her voice was trembling. "Mom, my key doesn't work." "What do you mean?" "I tried it a bunch of times. It won't turn. Grandma's car is here, and so is Grandpa's. But they won't open the door. I can see lights inside." "How long have you been outside?" "Since school ended." It was nearly 500. She'd been locked out for more than 2 hours in the rain. I felt sick. By the time I got there, nearly 5 hours had passed. Lily was curled under the porch, drenched, shivering, her small hands clutching her backpack. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "Why wouldn't they let me in, Mom?" I wrapped her in my jacket and pounded on the door. "Mom, Dad." "It's me, Catalina." "Open up." No answer. I tried my key, it didn't fit. My hands shook as I knocked again, louder this time, until finally the porch light flicked on. The door opened just enough for my mother's face to appear. Her expression was calm, almost rehearsed. "Mom, what's going on?" I demanded. "Why wouldn't you let Lily inside? Why doesn't my key work?" She looked me dead in the eye and said, "We've all decided you and Lily don't live here anymore." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "Thomas, Valerie, your father, and I talked. You take advantage of family. Catalina, it's time you stood on your own 2 feet." Behind her, I saw my father sitting in his chair, looking confused. My siblings stood nearby, their faces stone. "You left a 10-year-old outside in a storm," I said, my voice shaking. "She could have gone to a neighbor," my mother replied coolly. "You can't rely on us forever." "I pay rent," I snapped. "I buy groceries. I help with Dad's care." "It's not enough," Thomas said flatly. And that was it. I realized then that nothing I said would matter. They had made their choice. They had chosen cruelty and called it tough love. "Understood," I said quietly. My mother handed me a single duffel bag. "We've packed what you need for tonight. You can collect the rest later." I took the bag, held my daughter's trembling hand, and walked away. "Where are we going?" Mom Lily whispered as we drove off into the storm. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." The motel sign flickered ahead of us, casting a dull pink glow through the rain. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. And as I helped Lily into bed that night, listening to her breathing unevenly as fever took hold, I promised myself this: they had thrown us out to break me. But I was going to rise not just for myself, but for my daughter. This betrayal would not be our ending. It would be the beginning of our fight. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain still tapping against the motel window. Dull and relentless. The air smelled faintly of damp carpet and cheap coffee. But I didn't care. All I could think about was Lily. She was burning up. Her forehead glistened with sweat, her cheeks flushed deep red. The night before, she had shivered so hard in her sleep that I'd wrapped her in every towel I could find. Now, I could see the fever had taken hold. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Am I in trouble? Did Grandma kick us out because I did something bad?" That single sentence broke me. I pressed her hand to my chest and said, "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." She nodded, trusting me completely, even when I didn't trust myself. I called the hospital, explaining I couldn't come in. My supervisor, kind, overworked, and understanding, told me to take care of my daughter. "We'll cover your shift," she said. "And Amanda, I hope things get better at home." Home. The word felt like a cruel joke. I drove Lily to urgent care, my heart racing as I carried her inside. The nurse took her temperature 103.8 degrees. Looks like the start of bronchitis, she said. She needs rest and antibiotics. Rest. How could I tell her to rest when we didn't even have a bed to call ours anymore? By afternoon, I'd used the last of my savings to extend the motel for 3 more nights. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, gave me a sympathetic look. Tough times, she asked softly. I smiled weakly, something like that. That night, as Lily finally drifted into sleep beside me, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, the anger slowly blooming into something darker resolve. They thought they could humiliate me into silence. They thought I'd crawl back, begging. They didn't know me at all. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and planning. I contacted the landlord from the apartment we used to rent years ago, asking if he had any vacancies. Miraculously, he did a small unit in the same building. It needs some work, he warned. But if you're willing to paint, I can lower the deposit. I accepted instantly. While Lily rested, I spent my nights on the motel floor filling out forms, updating my address, calculating what little I had left. Every dollar mattered now. Between phone calls, I stared at my phone, tempted to call my mother, to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask how she could look at her granddaughter, her only grandchild, and still lock her out in the rain. But then I remembered that expression on her face that night, cold, self-satisfied, unflinching. I realized she wouldn't have cared. So instead, I started documenting everything. Screenshots of rent transfers, grocery receipts, text messages where she'd asked me to pick up Dad's prescriptions, a record proof of what I'd contributed, of how unfair this was. At first, I didn't even know why I was doing it. But a voice inside me whispered that one day, I'd need to remind them who they had thrown away. By the end of that week, Lily's fever broke. She was still weak, but her smile had returned. Can we go home soon? She asked, her voice hopeful. Yes, I said, even though I didn't yet know how to make it true. Then came a call I wasn't expecting. It was Valerie, my sister. She started the conversation with a sigh that carried years of condescension. Mom feels bad about what happened, she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. She just thinks it's time you stand on your own. She left my child outside in a storm, I said flatly. You call that standing on my own? She didn't mean harm. Catalina, you've always been dramatic. You know how Mom is. I do, I said quietly. That's the problem. She wants you to stop making a scene, Valerie continued. You're making her look bad. Something in me snapped. She made herself look bad. Tell her that. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I started moving the first of our boxes into the new apartment. It was bare, dusty, and the paint peeled in the corners. But it was ours. I spread out a blanket on the floor and let Lily help me scrub the walls. She hummed softly, her voice still raspy, but cheerful. When we finally sat down, sweaty and exhausted, she said, I like this place. It feels quiet. Quiet, peaceful, safe. Those were words that hadn't existed in my mother's house for years. A week later, I got a letter from my brother. Thomas, neatly typed, formal. He wrote that the family had agreed to remove my name from all shared property records related to the house to avoid confusion. It wasn't even mine to begin with, but the wording was like a knife. At the bottom, he added, You're welcome to collect any remaining items after 6 p.m. Sunday. Please notify Mom in advance. As if I were a stranger. Lily saw me staring at the letter and asked, What's that? Just grown-up stuff, I said, crumpling it in my hand. But inside, I knew I couldn't ignore it. If I didn't go back for our things, they'd claim I'd abandoned them and I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. That Sunday, I drove back, my stomach twisting. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same, the hydrangeas, the porch light, even the bird feeder my dad had built. But something about it felt poisoned now. I knocked. My father opened the door this time. His eyes lit up for a second. Lena, he said, using the childhood nickname only he still used. I've missed you. Hi, Dad, I said softly. He stepped aside, whispering, I didn't want this, you know that, right? I nodded, biting back tears. Inside, my mother was waiting. She looked surprised I'd come. You don't have to drag this out, she said. Let's just get it done. I ignored her tone. I gathered Lily's books, her stuffed rabbit, our family photos. My father tried to help, but she stopped him. You'll tire yourself, she said coldly. When I finished, I turned to her. You know, I said quietly, I used to think there was nothing worse than being abandoned. But I was wrong. The worst thing is realizing your family can look at you, bleeding, and feel nothing. She looked away, her expression unreadable. I walked out without another word. Outside, the air smelled like rain again. Lily reached for my hand. We don't need them, do we, Mom? I smiled through the ache. No, sweetheart, we have each other. And that was when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to make sure they saw what they'd thrown away. They had humiliated me publicly, destroyed my sense of belonging, but I would rebuild, piece by piece, until my life outshined their cruelty. They wanted me to disappear. I was going to rise instead, and when I did, they'd have to watch every second of it. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding my life from ashes, piece by piece. The way someone learns to breathe again after drowning. The first thing I did was stabilize the basics: our home, our safety, our routine. The apartment was small, but I transformed it into something warm. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, but I painted Lily's room a soft lavender and hung up string lights she'd chosen herself. She told me it felt like sleeping inside a dream. I found a secondhand couch from a Facebook group, a chipped dining table someone was giving away for free, and mismatched dishes from a thrift store. Somehow, it all came together. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every night after dinner, Lily and I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant promises. And though part of me still ached for what I had lost, my father's soft laugh, the house that used to feel like home, I began to realize that what I'd gained was far greater. I was finally living without fear of being judged in my own kitchen, without walking on eggshells, without being told I was a burden. But peace, I learned, has a strange way of attracting chaos, especially when that chaos wears your last name. It started with a phone call from my mother. I didn't answer. Then came texts from Valerie. Mom isn't well. She says you're cruel for ignoring her. She misses Lily. At least let her see her granddaughter. She's still your mother. I stared at the messages, feeling the familiar knot of guilt tighten in my stomach. But then I thought about the rain that day, Lily's tiny, shivering body, her soaked hair plastered to her face, her trembling voice asking why Grandma wouldn't let her in. That memory was enough to keep my phone face down on the table. They could manipulate each other all they wanted. Not me, not anymore. Still, the silence weighed on me. At night, I'd catch myself scrolling through old photos, my dad holding Lily in the garden, my mother smiling stiffly at a family barbecue, my siblings standing beside me pretending we were something close to love. I missed my father, deeply. His mind was slipping further each day, and I couldn't shake the fear that when he forgot everything else, he might forget me too. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving work, my coworker handed me an envelope. "This came for you," she said. It was from my father. Inside was a letter, written in shaky handwriting that looked like it had cost him every ounce of focus he had left. "My dearest Lena, I don't know if your mother will send this, but I need you to know something. I never agreed to what happened. I was confused that day. They told me you'd already left, that you wanted to go. By the time I realized, it was too late. I'm sorry. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I wanted to call you, but your mother said it would make things worse. Please don't hate me. I never stopped loving you. You and Lily are my heart. Dad." I sat in my car and cried so hard that my chest hurt. I'd been angry at him for staying silent, for letting it happen, but now I saw it wasn't silence. It was manipulation. My mother had isolated him too, just as she'd done to me. The realization burned like acid. That night, I made a decision I would see him. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, but because he deserved to know that I understood and that I still loved him too. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house again. My heart hammered in my chest as I parked in the driveway. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, the same blue as the year before, but the air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. When my mother opened the door, her face went pale. "Catalina," she said sharply, "you shouldn't be here." "I'm here to see Dad," I said simply. "He's resting." "I'll wait." She hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. When I entered the living room, my father's eyes lit up instantly. "Lena," he said, struggling to rise from his chair, his voice cracked with joy. I ran to him and hugged him tightly. He smelled like cedar and old books, just like always. "I got your letter," I whispered. He pulled back, tears glistening in his eyes. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen." "Sweetheart." "I know," I said softly. "It wasn't your fault." We sat together for nearly an hour, talking quietly while my mother hovered like a ghost in the hallway. When I finally stood to leave, my father gripped my hand. "Promise me you'll keep living," he said. "Don't let bitterness take root. You're better than that." I promised him I would. As I walked toward the door, my mother stopped me. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed. "You've upset him." I turned to face her fully for the first time. "No. Mother, you did that when you turned love into control." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. I left without looking back. A month later, I got the call. My father had passed in his sleep, peacefully. The nurse said, I felt the world tilt beneath me. At the funeral, I stood at the edge of the crowd, away from my siblings, away from my mother's sharp eyes. The service was beautiful, quiet hymns, a slideshow of photos that made my chest ache. When it ended, I approached his casket alone. My fingers trembled as I rested them on the smooth wood. I kept my promise. "Dad," I whispered, "I'm still living. I'm still fighting." Behind me, my mother's voice cracked. "You shouldn't be here." I turned slowly. "You don't get to decide that anymore." She glared at me, but for the first time. I saw fear in her eyes, not anger, not authority. Fear, because she knew she couldn't control me anymore. After the funeral, I returned home and found Lily waiting on the couch, her hands folded. "Was Grandpa peaceful?" she asked. "Yes," I said, sitting beside her. "He was—" She leaned into me and whispered, "He loved you, Mom. I could tell." I smiled through my tears. "I know, sweetheart. I'll love him forever." That night, I sat on the porch of our little apartment, the air heavy with the scent of rain and earth, and I realized that grief and freedom often live in the same breath. You lose one kind of love to make room for another. I'd lost my family, but I'd gained something far more precious: truth. The truth that sometimes blood is not thicker than peace. That survival is not weakness, it's rebirth. And most of all, that love, the real kind, isn't given conditionally or revoked when it's inconvenient. It's steadfast, it's kind. The kind my father gave me, the kind I'm giving to my daughter. A few months after my father's funeral, the seasons began to shift. The air turned cooler, the sky clearer. There was a stillness in the evenings that I hadn't felt in years, a kind of quiet that didn't ache anymore. Lily and I had built something new. Our apartment was alive with color and laughter. Every Sunday, we'd cook pancakes and eat them on the balcony, the smell of butter and syrup drifting into the morning air. I'd watch her giggle as she poured too much syrup on her plate, and in those moments, I felt like I'd finally done something right. But grief doesn't vanish, it transforms. It hides in the smallest things: the smell of coffee reminding me of Dad, the sound of birds outside the window like the ones he used to name. And then there was the guilt for not forgiving my mother. Guilt for not visiting her even though she lived just across town. Sometimes, I'd catch myself wondering if she ever looked at an empty chair at dinner and thought of me. Then, one rainy evening, the phone rang. It was Valerie again. Her voice was shaky this time, not defensive, not cold. "Mom's in the hospital," she said. "She fell in the kitchen. They think it's a stroke." For a moment, I said nothing. My first instinct was to harden myself, to remember the storm, the locked door, the child left outside. But then I saw Lily's face, her eyes wide, her voice small. "Grandma's sick." And I realized something. Hate was heavy, and I was tired of carrying it. "I'll be there soon," I said. The hospital was quiet, sterile, filled with that faint smell of antiseptic and fear that I knew too well from my years of nursing. When I entered her room, my mother looked impossibly small. Her hair was thinner, her skin pale, her left hand weakly gripping the blanket. She turned her head slowly when she saw me. Her lips trembled. "You came." "I did," I said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you would." I pulled a chair beside her bed. "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but Dad would have wanted me to." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made mistakes," she said. The words came haltingly, each one like a stone being lifted. "I thought I was helping you. I didn't realize how much I hurt you. Or Lily." For years, I had imagined what this moment would look like if it ever came. I thought I'd feel vindicated, powerful, righteous. But sitting there, watching my mother struggle for breath between her words, all I felt was sadness. "Why, Mom?" I asked quietly. "Why was it so hard to just love me without controlling me?" She blinked, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you'd fail. Afraid you'd need me forever. Afraid that if I wasn't strong, no one would be." I sat back, stunned. I had spent years trying to decode her cruelty, never imagining it came from fear. "You didn't have to be strong," I said. "You just had to be kind." She closed her eyes. "I know." I stayed with her that night. I adjusted her blanket, fetched her water, held her hand when she grew restless. And as the hours passed, I realized that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it define you anymore. By morning, her condition stabilized. When I left, she reached for my wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for still coming." Weeks passed. She recovered slowly. Valerie and Thomas handled most of her appointments, but sometimes she'd call me. Her voice had softened. She asked about Lily often. She even sent small gifts, sketchbooks, books, little notes written in shaky cursive. At first, I thought it was guilt, but as time went on, I realized she was trying, in her own clumsy way, to reconnect. One Sunday, Lily asked if she could see her. "She's still my grandma," she said gently. And so, one afternoon, I took her. When my mother saw Lily walk into the room, something in her broke. She burst into tears. "I don't deserve to see you," she said, her voice trembling. Her voice. Lily hugged her without hesitation. "It's okay, Grandma," she said. "Everyone makes mistakes." In that instant, I saw a glimpse of what family could have been if only love had come without conditions. Time moved forward, as it always does. Lily grew taller, more confident. I earned a promotion at the hospital and finally managed to buy a small townhouse on the edge of the city, a place with a garden and a swing set. On the first day we moved in, Lily planted sunflowers in the front yard so Grandpa can see them. She said, I smiled, he would have loved that. Life didn't become perfect, it never does, but it became peaceful. And peace, I learned, is worth more than any apology, any inheritance, any illusion of family unity. I still saw my mother occasionally, but I never moved backward. Our conversations were brief, cautious. I set boundaries and kept them, and though she never fully changed, I noticed something different in her eyes when she looked at me, something like respect. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. One evening, years later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Lily and I sat on the porch, sipping tea. She was 15 now, funny, strong and wise beyond her years. Mom, she said suddenly, do you ever miss them, the way things used to be? I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I miss what I wanted them to be. I said, but not what they were. She nodded slowly. Grandma told me once that you're the bravest person she knows. I blinked. She said that. Yeah, Lily said with a grin. She said she didn't understand you until she got old enough to regret it. For the first time in years, I felt something loosen in my chest, a kind of peace I hadn't realized I was still chasing. I looked at the horizon, the sky glowing gold and pink. Maybe that's enough. I whispered. Lily leaned her head on my shoulder. You taught me something. Mom. What's that? That family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up when it rains. I smiled, my eyes wet. You're right, sweetheart. And as long as we have each other, we'll never be alone in the storm again. The wind carried the scent of blooming sunflowers across the yard, and in that quiet, I felt my father's presence soft, steady, proud. I had survived betrayal, rebuilt my life from ruin, and learned that the greatest revenge is not hatred, but happiness. Because nothing unsettles those who tried to destroy you more than watching you rise, smiling, unbroken. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional real-life stories about strength, love, and healing after betrayal. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose peace over family? End.